you've been at the forefront of conducting research in the psychiatric profession, especially around, gender and disability, and treatment of women. So even through your work at the CWDS, I just wanted to understand, one, how you got interested in working in this field.
Um, well, you see, the thing is that when I was doing my work on psychiatry, it was many years ago when your existence was not even, on the horizon. And I was probably one of the first to, from a social science perspective, to look at psychiatry. And I was very much interested in, definition between abnormal behavior and normal behavior and that kind of stuff. So I went in with that. And then I found that there was very little gendering of the psychiatric discourse, that, people were just treated as if they do not have a gender. And when you treat a situation where there's no gender, it's actually a lot of the ideas and issues around the male gender which dominate. So that got me interested into studying women and their experiences of psychiatric illness. And psychiatric illness, of course, it's true that there's a lot of social factors which come into creating it, but there are also biological factors. And there are also differences between men and women biologically with regard to their predisposition to mental illness and psychiatric illness. But what I found interesting was that while in the case of men, a lot of psychiatric illness was linked to issues around male identity, around job, around education, around status, around fulfilling ideal role of a male towards his parents. These were things that bothered a lot of the psychiatrically disturbed male patients. While in the case of women, I found that a lot of issues were, and particularly with married women, were around their experience of abuse in the marital household, around issues of forced sexual interactions, around molestation, around rape. So that got me interested that, there are actually very distinct, violence is not a uniform category, and there are very distinct reasons why, or very dominant factors which predispose women to be victims of forms of violence. And there are also factors which predispose men, but the violence when it comes to men is very much dependent on issues like status within society, their idea of their conception of themselves as strong, capable, independent, and also issues around substance abuse. Of course, the issues of substance abuse now are also coming up with women, because more women are now having access to alcohol. And then, at that time, this was like a very medical domain, looking at mental illness and all. Over the years, it became a more socially instantiated domain also. For example, around disability, when I was studying mental illness, it was not a disability, but now it is. So, my interests also in the areas evolved as the conceptual framework around those issues evolved.
That's very interesting. So, in your experience over the last several years, what are the changes that you've seen in the incidence of gender-based violence? Like, do you think we've made progress, or have things gotten worse?
A person called Emil Durkheim says that the rates of abnormal behavior remain more or less constant in any given society. You can argue with that. But it's not that now you open the newspaper, POXO, rape, molestation, they're not new. It's just that you didn't talk about them. They were, swept away, or they were considered irrelevant, or they were considered unimportant, or they were considered so important that you had to be silent about them because issues of shame and stigma were so attached to them. It is true that, say, in the 30, 40 years ago, your grandparents, the women mostly stayed at home. So it was not that violence was not there at home. It was very much there. It was not that rape was not there, but it was confined within the domestic sphere, within the larger family, within the neighborhood, and there was a huge secrecy around it. You were stigmatized. The family was stigmatized if something like that happened. So I think it was very much there, just that you didn't talk about it. Now women are going out, they're earning, Their negotiating power is becoming more. They are more visible in the public sphere. They're taking away jobs for men.
Mhm.
That makes them more targets, because it's also a competition over resources. It's not just about izzat and, honor and family prestige. Men are now, they're feeling if there are more women coming into the market, their chances of getting jobs in the job market decrease, right?
Mhm.
So then it becomes an issue of contestation. Whenever you challenge power, when it's disabled people challenging non-disabled people,
Mhm.
when it's Dalits challenging non-Dalits, when it's women challenging men, those who are in power will always retaliate. And those who are not in power but struggling will have to suffer. It's just that it's more visible, it's more talked about, it's more in your face, it's more discussed. It was just normalized earlier. So it was even in your NFHS data.
Mhm.
Many women will say that it's okay
Yeah.
if a man, if a husband out of anger lifts his hand. It's
Mhm.
okay. They think it's normal. And they've been brought to believe, well, I mean, that's the way it is. The gender roles dictate that. But now there's a contestation that maybe that's not normal. The behaviors remain,
Mhm.
and they remain more or less constant biologically. But it's the way that society looks at them, and the way that society values or devalues them, and the way that culture approaches them. So you see, it's also an issue of definition. Earlier in our disability legislation, there were only 7 categories of disability. Now there's 21. So has disability increased? No. It's just that you're looking at it differently.
So it's context and visibility.
Yeah.
So through the research, as I mentioned, 36% of women who were employed were subject to domestic violence, while this number was 25% amongst unemployed women. So as a researcher, as a sociologist, is that something that comes as a surprise? No?
No. Money can't buy you a relationship. Money can't buy you a marriage. Money can't buy you a social stability. So many of my own colleagues, friends, they don't have control over their money. Now, you think of a woman, let's leave out the upper, low, very low and the very high, because they have different dynamics. So a woman's got married, she's, say, a school teacher, she's earning. In the way that the Indian marriage is set up, the husband's family is still more powerful. Her contact with her natal family becomes less.
Mm-hmm.
I'm speaking of typical situation. Now, that woman, maybe giving her the money, she may not have control over her money.
Mm-hmm.
That's why women develop strategies that they will not share their bank details with their husbands. They will keep their bank information at their workplace. They will not have things lying around. They'll not tell their their spouse or their in-laws how much they earn. They'll
Mm-hmm.
keep money aside. That happened in the pandemic. Many households survived on the earnings of women who had saved up money for other things, for their child's education or something. So what I'm saying is that, yes, under normal circumstances, there is, and that's the buzzword also, that economic empowerment means empowerment,
Mm-hmm.
and in many cases, it does become a very important negotiating chip. But the point is that it's not the only thing that determines your empowerment. And just because you earn money, you may not have it's not necessary that you may have the confidence.
Mm-hmm.
You may be earning, but you may still be a very diffident person. You may be very dependent. You may, not have that independent spirit. You may not have the courage. Your family is not cooperative. You may not have the courage to defy them. That why you say, okay, she's so empowered. Why is she getting beaten up by her husband? It's her fault.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, I don't think that's the way to look at it. That's not the way the world works.
Yeah.
Definitely, it has the potential to make you more empowered, but it doesn't mean that it'll always happen. There are many other factors that come into play.
So oftentimes for women in India, education or the lack of education comes at the expense of work. So what is your sense of how this barrier can be broken? Have you seen India break this barrier already?
Yeah,
or
I
be
think
successful in doing
definitely the rate of school enrollment of girls has increased, and particularly in places where the state is offering incentives, it does help. It does help. But yes, because the dropout rate still continues to be high. You have to disaggregate which areas are progressing, in which areas is it not. For example, the figures in the south are very different from the figures in North India. And if you look at the figures of higher education in India, there are now as many boys as girls in higher education. So, they must have gone through a school system to get into higher education, right? But then most of them after higher education are not getting into the job market.
Mm-hmm.
They are, going into domestic life. So then why is the state wasting so much money on educating them if they're not going to use that skill?
Mm-hmm.
Because it's prestige. You get a better
Yeah.
spouse if you're got a higher degree.
Okay, so what is your view on the extent of research that is now being done in associated fields in India? Because usually we see an increased importance amongst college students wanting to pursue research in fields like this, which otherwise we've typically seen in the West more commonly than in India.
There are multiple arenas of research.
Mm-hmm.
So I think the expansion of research has really happened in India in a big way now, particularly in the urban areas. And that's just moving beyond the university system, moving beyond PhDs and MPhils and all.
Yeah.
Because what is research? Actually, at the end of the day, information, insight, which can be used for a multiplicity of ways.
Yeah.
You can use research to sell shampoo, and you can use research to write a brilliant book.
So lastly, I'd love to hear about how you think women can be encouraged to have an equal seat at the table, irrespective of their socioeconomic status, with men in their family, in their extended family, workplace, or just society in general.
They have to want it,
Mm-hmm.
and then they have to work for it. They have to fight for it. It's not going to come.
Yeah.
Nothing is free in life. There are no free lunches. But if you want systemic change, people have to want it. And then one generation has to fight a lot and the next generation gets it.
Mm-hmm.
So nobody is going to give anything on a platter. It
Yeah.
doesn't work like that. It seems like it does. The government says, we will do this, and then women will get empowered, and then, there will be equality, and
Yeah.
beti padhao, and beti ko, all this, and it will happen. It doesn't happen like that.
Mm-hmm.
First, there has to be a drive for it, and that happens from an individual point of view. And then when number of people come to think in that way, there's a drive, then it takes on a momentum and maybe change will happen.
Mm-hmm.
So I feel many women are driven now.
Yeah.
Many women want to be, for example, even in lower middle class women, they don't want to now just get married. They want to be educated.
Yeah.
They want to earn, because money has become very important. If you don't earn the packet, you don't get prestige in society. It's different. Money is the determinant.
Yeah.
And then they'll fight in their families, and there are many fights going on in families.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe 10 years from now it will come up as a figure or a percentage, but there are many women who are fighting in their families. Some lose, some win.
Mm-hmm.